Hi and welcome everyone. Amandha Vollmer here from Yum Naturals Emporium, and I have a special treat for you. I will be interviewing David Parker and Dawn Lester of this wonderful book called What Really Makes You Ill: Why Everything You Thought You Knew About Disease is Wrong. Now, my understanding is that this took quite a number of years to compile, and if you read it, as I've been reading through it in chapters and going into depth in it, it's very meaty, and it's not something you write overnight. My understanding is that it took about 10 years to write this magnum opus. And would you like to tell my viewers just about how that was for you both? And by the way, welcome, because I'm so excited for this interview because I love your book. I love this topic. It's a topic that I've been passionate about for a number of years. You know, what is really going on with disease as a holistic practitioner? You know, I see this day in and day out. And when you start to apply the logic of the body being intelligent and thinking about toxicology instead of some sort of mysterious germ, you get the results you're looking for. So there's also a lot of clinical evidence, you know, from day to day that I know, you know, the germ theory is false. Not just in that alone, I would know it, never mind the rest of the research, but you've done all of this research. So why don't you tell us how that was for you, what the process was like for building this incredible book?
Okay. Yes, thank you. Yes, you're quite correct. It did take 10 years, 10 years of research for the two of us. So a lot of work went into the book. We didn't intend it to be that way, and we didn't set out to rubbish the medical establishment. It's just that some anomalies had come up in our personal lives, mine in particular, with friends and family being diagnosed with various cancers over the years prior to writing the book, and they all went down the official medical route with what they were being prescribed to do with the normal treatments and things, and they all died, unfortunately, which is apart from one relative. I'm talking about 6 different people here, close family and relatives. But one relative, an elderly lady, didn't take the prescribed treatments, although she'd been diagnosed with cancer in the same sort of geographical area. And she survived fine. She'd have nothing to do with the medical establishment, and she was fine. And after a year or so, because they kept testing her, they were able to tell her that her cancer had completely disappeared. So that was the first sort of, I thought, okay, so everyone that did what the medical establishment said died, and the one that didn't do what the medical establishment lived. So that was the first wake-up call. There's something wrong here. But also, Dawn and I had written a couple of books before this tome, and one of them was about the nature of reality, but we wrote under a pen name then, which was NOR, stood for the nature of reality. So it was a non-medical book. It was about, you know, the big questions in life. You know, is there a purpose to life? Why are we here? What happens to us when we die? Those sort of things, which have been a passion of mine in particular for many, many years. But there was one chapter in that which was about health and how it figured in the nature of reality and human life, and in particular a chapter about viruses. And we realized we didn't really know very much about viruses at that time, so I'm going back quite a number of years now, probably 15 years. So we started researching it, and purely by chance we came across the first disease that we looked at, which was HIV/AIDS. And up until that point, we believed what everyone else believed, you know, that germs made you ill, germs of one sort or another, whether it's bacteria or viruses, that most diseases were caused by them, that vaccinations were good for you and prevented you getting these diseases. That's what we believed. And when the HIV/AIDS thing hit the scenes, you know, in the 80s, we believed what the medical establishment were telling us, and the media in particular, with all their dreaded imageries of mass graves and tombstones. It was dreadful, frightened everyone. But we thought they knew what they were talking about. But as we found out when we started the research, nothing could be further from the truth. We realized that the medical establishment was not based on science. It was based on assumptions and dogma. and that none of the things that we thought we had been told about disease was all wrong. Hence the title of the book. We sort of titled it in the way we started, that we wanted to know then what really did make you ill and why everything we thought we knew about disease was wrong, because that's what we were finding out. But as I say, the first disease we looked at was HIV/AIDS, and we wanted to know what was the cause of it. But it didn't take too long and not too much research, although we spent quite a lot of time on it, which we detail in the book. We realised that there was no virus that was the cause of it. There was nothing proven. There were no scientific papers to show that a virus was the cause. And we sort of read the reports from other sort of luminaries like Carrie Mullis, who was around at the time and was very vocal about it. And he also looked for any scientific papers and realised, like us, there weren't any. So again, we thought, this is very strange. Why are there no scientific papers to show that this virus has been isolated and fully categorized and proven to cause the disease? They should be there, and they weren't. So the more we did more digging and realized that, cutting a very long story short, because we went to lots of meetings with people who were vocal about it, dissidents. We read reports from people like Carrie Mullis, Peter Duesberg and others, talked to doctors, talked to supposedly HIV positive people who thought they were HIV positive, because they didn't know the flawed test which was being used on them, like now. So we spent a lot of time looking at that, and we realized that there were very straightforward reasons for what was actually happening. I'll be brief, but we realized that this small group of homosexual men in the San Francisco area that were first supposedly manifesting this disease, it wasn't a disease at all. Their illnesses were easily attributable to their lifestyles. And I'm not talking about them being homosexual men. That had nothing to do with it whatsoever. But they did all use recreational drugs. They're quite heavy users of recreational drugs. In particular, what we call poppers, which is quite a toxic drug. It's amyl nitrate, which is very toxic to the body. And of course, this was making them ill. But then they were going to the doctors, who were then giving them high dose and repeated doses of antibiotics, which made them even more ill. And then the doctors were thinking they were seeing some sort of new disease. And so they started to try different drugs out on these unfortunate men, one of which was AZT, or AZT as it's often called in the States, which was originally a chemotherapy drug. Nothing to so, as the medical establishment often do, they've got something on the shelf that's laid around for a while. Oh, let's try this, which is what they did. And talking to other doctors later, some German doctors, we realized, and they told us, that at the dose that these unfortunate men were given, this high dose AZT, it killed everyone. Everyone that had that rate died. And I'm talking about people like Freddie Mercury and Rudolf Nureyev and Arthur Ashe. So a lot of famous people died, obviously quite needlessly, because it was the drug that was killing them. Now, the medical establishment realized this, and of course, although they never admitted to it openly, naturally, but it did come out. Some doctors were honest, and our research showed us what was really going off. So in subsequent years, the doctors reduced those doses of AZT to a much lower dose. I think they still prescribe it. It's still toxic, and it still doesn't do any good. It just takes really longer to kill people, I guess. So that was the first one. So we spent quite a lot of time on it, and Dawn and I realized that, we said to one another, if they can be so wrong about this one thing, what else are they wrong about? And that was really the start of disappearing down this very deep rabbit hole, which took 10 years of research. Because there's probably people that have listened to us before, they know that neither Dawn or I are from a medical establishment. I mean, I'm an electrical engineer and Dawn's an accountant. But and people often say, well, how can we be writing about these medical things? And the answer is easy, really, for the reasons we got into it, as I've just mentioned, accidentally, really. But because we both have technical backgrounds, so we're used to doing research, we're used to paying great attention to detail, and we're used to asking questions regardless of what people might think of us. And unlike doctors, we could ask the questions they were afraid to ask. Otherwise, they lost their jobs, as some have. But we had no allegiances to anyone, so we could ask any questions we liked, and we did. Even as we met doctors and challenged them over these things, and of course they couldn't prove us wrong. So that was the start of it. So because we could see that there was a lot of things wrong with what the medical establishment was telling us, we thought, well, we need to go back to square one, or go back to quite an early date and see how all this started. And of course it started with really the germ theory. And so we're going back about 150 years-ish. And the sort of person most sort of known for the germ theory is sort of Louis Pasteur, although he wasn't really the first, but it seems to get attributed to him. He had the most to say about it and developed it. But I mean, he was a chemist. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't even a proper scientist. And as later years have shown, he was somewhat of a fraud. You know, much of what he wrote and claimed has proved to be untrue. But the world is still suffering from it. And other scientists around at the time knew there were great problems with what Louis Pasteur was saying, but he'd got the ear of some very influential people in France. And so they sort of, the usual thing is they ignore the truth and just go with what's suitable for the regime at the time. And of course, we had then a growing, the start of what has now become the pharmaceutical industry. So wherever you'd got something that you could kill, supposedly, germs of one sort or another, either bacteria or, as they later came to be known in the 1930s, viruses. But they were seen as something that would attack the body and therefore needs to be killed, with various lotions and potions and later vaccinations, of course. And so this became the huge industry that it is today, making billions, all based on a fallacy, because as we dug deeper and deeper and deeper and realized that there was no scientific evidence to prove either bacteria were the cause of any diseases or the so-called viruses. And as people probably know, the word virus actually comes from the Latin, and its original meaning was poison or toxic material. So it was nothing to do with an organism, a supposed microorganism, which they didn't even know existed until the 1930s, when the electron microscope was invented, and they could see these smaller particles in tissue and the blood. And they made their second big mistake, which was to see these small particles and start to attribute other diseases to them, which they couldn't blame on bacteria. They could see bacteria, which are living organisms, of course. They could see them with their optical microscopes, but they couldn't see these smaller particles, which then they gave this name virus to, which is a misnomer, really. But that stuck with it, and we live with that today. So that's really two big mistakes. First, they saw bacteria, and whenever they looked at them in a supposedly diseased person, they saw these bacteria clustered around dead or dying tissue, and assumed that they were the cause of the dead and dying tissue, instead of realizing that they were actually part of the cleanup mechanism and were actually getting rid of the dead and dying tissue in the same way as bacteria does in the forests, you know, with dead trees and vegetation. They break it down into its component parts so it can return to the earth and be useful. And it's the same in the human body. The body has trillions of bacteria, both in it and on it, which are all doing a special job. Without them, there would be no life. We would die. But as I say, that was their first mistake in attributing disease to bacteria and then later to viruses. And that's just the paradigm that we're locked into now. And of course, then I won't call it a science, but the methodology of virology came along, and which is a whole industry that's grown up around this same fallacy. And there are many others like ourselves that have investigated virology and realized that, again, there is no scientific basis for them being able to attribute any disease to a so-called virus. And again, like us, many people have looked for the scientific papers to substantiate the claim that virologists make. They don't exist. And many doctors, including modern day doctors like Dr. Andy Kaufman, Dr. Tom Cowan, and others, have also looked for these papers, and they don't exist. And they've been challenged to produce them. And many people around the world have written to their health authorities and governments under the Freedom of Information Act to ask for the proof. You know, where is your scientific evidence that, particularly with this so-called coronavirus, where is your scientific evidence that this virus is the cause of this supposed disease? And in every case, and we have copies of most of these papers, there's dozens and dozens of them. In every case, the authorities have written back and said, we do not have that information, which sort of beggars belief, doesn't it? You know, they openly admit they don't have the scientific information, and yet they continue to shut the world down on the basis that they do know that this virus exists and causes this COVID-19, which of course it doesn't. It's a complete fiction. And we have looked into the reasons behind this, and we may get into it later in the chat if you wish. We do start to touch on it, vested interests in our book. But of course, our book doesn't cover coronavirus specifically, because at the time we released it, which was Christmas of 2019, coronavirus, nobody had heard of it. And people often said to us, oh, it's very fortuitous that you released your book just as this was released, the coronavirus was released on the world. And we said, well, yes, if you believe in coincidences, which we don't, but you know, theoretically, we didn't know the name of it because no one else did. But that doesn't denigrate anything we've written, because it applies, what we found applies to all so-called viral diseases, and that is, there is no proof, absolutely no proof whatsoever, that any virus caused any disease. And of course, we came across the work of people like Dr. Stefan Lanka, who I'm sure many people have heard about, and we have been fortunate enough to be able to chat to him a few times now. And we plan to do some more talks to try and help sort out this nonsense that's going on at the moment. But he, again, is on the record. He used to be a virologist. He was trained as a virologist. He doesn't like to be called that anymore, because he realizes that virology is not a science at all. It's just a methodology which is very flawed, and has been proven that the stuff they do in their petri dishes in laboratories bears little or no resemblance to things that are happening in the body. And that's why there is so many fallacies that come out of the laboratories, and so many predictions which cannot be proven about disease. So really, that's how we got into it. I know that's rather a convoluted answer, but that's how we got into it. And because we realized that it was so astounding to us, that we needed to be accurate, because we knew that we were going to be going straight up against the entire medical establishment with what our findings were showing. So we knew that we had to be accurate with what we've said. And so that's why in the book, as you've probably seen, there's 40 pages of citations, so that people can see where the research we did, where it came from, because we looked, as I say, right back over the last 150 years, the work of many doctors in the past and scientists, which all substantiate what was said, and continue to do so. So that's why it took 10 years, and we're sort of quite happy. And even to this day, no one has been able to disprove what we've said. And I'm pleased to say that more and more doctors now are speaking out and confirming that the germ theory is a fallacy and has no basis in science, and that the causes of disease are many, but none of them are to do with germs. And we do obviously talk in the book about what the causes of diseases are, illness. We rather like to talk about them as illnesses rather than diseases, because disease is a loaded word and people immediately think it's some sort of infectious agent involved, and there are no infectious agents. People are generally poisoned, or it's lack of nutrition. And in our book, we talk about, obviously, what the real causes, we found, what the real causes of disease are, and we boiled it down to 4 factors, which we can, again, talk about. So that's really what got us going, and why we spent so long doing it. But I know you have some specific questions you'd like to ask us, so I probably should let you ask us some of those questions rather than me keep talking.
Well, it's fascinating the way that our clear thinking mind will work. We're inquisitive by nature, so we start to ask questions, or we see something in our reality that just doesn't line up. And if we are the type of individual that wants to know, that's a seeker, that's interested, then we go, well, why did that happen? Now I have to ask that question. And then the question, begets another and begets another. And that's how you get into the knowledge base. And a lot of people, they aren't inquisitive types. They don't ask questions. They don't go, well, why did that kill my loved one? Or why am I seeing this similar theme about people dying when they take AZT? And then, they don't, a lot of people just are very, focused on what's before them. They aren't inquisitive. I think that's got us in a lot of trouble as a humanity. But that's the journey for a lot of us, where we're like, this isn't lining up. The story isn't holding water over time. So I have to ask questions. And that's a lot of people ask me, how do I help people get out of this stuck thinking that they're going to die from the air, that they breathe? And I say, well, you have to get them thinking. You have to ask questions. Don't tell them. Let them start to ask it for themselves, so they get their mind moving forward. And the other great thing I noticed when I was reading through your book is that you aren't indoctrinated into the medical field, so you don't have to unschool yourself. So you're coming in purely without the deep indoctrination. I went through medical school. I had to undo a lot of thinking that a lot of my colleagues are still stuck on, right? So that also was a process for me, where you didn't have to go through that undoing process. You just had to undo the cultural beliefs around those things, right? But you didn't get the deeper med school indoctrination, which can be very difficult to work around, especially if you're going against your colleagues and you're feeling like you're going to be marginalized or attacked and all of these sorts of things, which, I'm writing a book about cults right now and how the medical establishments run basically like a cult. So you're not allowed to ask questions in a cult. You're not allowed to come out of the cult think that way. So a lot of the practitioners are trapped. And so the fact that you were, clear thinkers like that and inquisitive really helped you as well have a clear book where, people can get outside of that cult think. The other thing I find fascinating about the way you present the information is obviously it's loaded with references and scientific fact. However, you're very, very logical. And I appreciate that, because it is just a logical thought that, how about we clear up assumptions? Because this is an assumption with no scientific backing. This is an assumption with no scientific backing. And I love that about the book, because it makes you go, yes, that's true. I haven't seen any science about that. They had to go from this to that. Now maybe they're trying to make up science about the next leap they made, but they didn't qualify the in-between. For example, I want to ask you, about virus mechanism, because they even say a virus is not living. It doesn't move. It needs mechanisms of a cell in order to reproduce itself. But they never, in your book, you say they never qualify. How does the non-living thing suddenly attach itself to a cell? There has to be a mechanism involved. That mechanism then has to make that material somehow animated for it to go through its reproductive cycle. But science doesn't qualify that. It doesn't say, well, this is exactly how that happens. Here's how it attaches. It's left up to this randomness, right? So there's big gaps in the knowledge. So they say it's non-motile, but that it can hitchhike onto a cell. So how? And they don't do that information, and they don't have the scientific evidence. And I noticed that all the way through. So the question is, first of all, how did they go from understanding that, a wound on your skin, if you put somebody else's material inside you, you'll get sick, right? Like somebody else's cells and somebody else's blood and somebody else's cellular products, you will go through a reaction to that because it's not you. But how did they go from, well, that's toxic and that's what we're calling a virus, to now it's all of a sudden a creature, a thing that can float around and miraculously turn into a disease of some sort, and that they're characterizing one disease for one virus? Because that the teasing out the whole virus lie is, I think, is very foundational for people, especially right now, to understand that there's no science, there's no logic even in that, those little steps towards the bigger claim. Do you know what I'm saying? So what kind of evidence and information did you find around that? And where was the thinking to switch all of a sudden from it's a toxin, now it's a virus that infects you? Because there's a big leap there as well.
Well, it's changes in definitions. It's the way people look at things. One of the people who we referred to was a biologist, Lynn Margulis, who said that a virus is inert. It's not alive, doesn't have any of the requisites for being classed as alive. So, it's non-living. We then found a number of different papers that were discussing these so-called so-called particles called viruses, and they were suggesting that they were somewhere in a grey area between, non-living and alive or something. So it's a question of trying to direct the narrative, because a non-living particle doesn't quite make sense how it would actually move between people. And as you say, what's the mechanism for traveling from one person to another? It's got to be alive in order to go from one person to then burrow into you and then cause some kind of disease. So yes, and then get into the cell. So somehow somebody realised that being non-living, that doesn't work. So they've got to try and suggest and change the evidence to or change the definition of the word so that they can suggest to people. It's manipulating how people think, what they what they know or what they think they know, and so that people can say, oh well, yes, it's a living thing, and therefore it's going to burrow into me. But as you say, it's supposed to use the host cell mechanism, but because this then gets rather technical, I believe that the kind of general public aren't prepared to do that work to look at any of the scientific evidence, because they think, oh no, it's beyond me. And that's part of the plot as well, because to make it sort of mystified and well, it's scientific, so you people, you don't know it, and you haven't trained like us. It's there's probably quite a bit of that as well. But again, as well as you said before, we didn't have to unschool ourselves, but we also had to get through that barrier of thinking, well, these, the scientists, these doctors, they've trained, they know what they're talking about. And we're now saying, well, actually, do you? Or, so that was quite a hurdle for us as well. But the more we looked into it, the more we realized that, we had to stop thinking, well, they're the authority, and just look at it with common sense and logic. And that's where we came across these knowledge gaps. And that's where we said, well, not just what we thought were knowledge gaps, they're admitted knowledge gaps. They say, well, so many papers we've come across, at the conclusion, they come up, well, we're not quite sure how this happens, how this works. More research is needed. Part of that is, of course, to make sure that they continue getting the research funding and they're continuing their careers. Or, well, we need to look into this some more. But at the same time, it draws question marks over what they say or what they claim they've found. And we think, well, if they're not sure, then they can't make those statements as if they are sure. And so the idea that there are these virus particles traveling in the air, going from one person to another in, when they sneeze or whatever, it's never been observed, never been demonstrated. They talk about how the sort of, if somebody sneezes or coughs, how far that the particles, sorry, the actual, if you like, water particles can go, can be spread. So that's if you like a distance, or well, but there's an assumption that the virus is in these, sneeze droplets, if you like. It's never been proven. There is absolutely no paper, no evidence anywhere that so-called virus particles have been found in these droplets.
And
pure assumptions.
They've tried in the past. I mean, the 1918 flu, so-called Spanish flu, in which we investigated and write about. I mean, the medical establishment in America tried on many occasions to see if they could actually cross-infect people in various trials, where they took groups of people that were supposed to have the flu and tried to transfer it to groups of healthy people, in quite disgusting ways, really, taking snot and saliva from the unhealthy people and introducing it into the nasal and throats of the healthy people. And they tried this dozens and dozens of times, even blood as well. And never once were they able to cross-infect anyone. So they've never then or since or at any time been able to prove this fallacy of infection, which is hardly surprising if the very things that they say cause the infection, i.e. viruses or bacteria, don't. If they don't cause infections, how can they ever prove infection? And as our research showed, that is a complete fallacy. You cannot infect someone with these agents. You can poison people with things, but you can't infect them with a bacteria or a virus. And to answer your question that you started with, these particles, and we like to call them that because as soon as you mention virus, everyone's got fixed ideas about what they are. But these particles are just really cellular debris. And that's all you can ever see under an electron microscope, because under an electron microscope, everything has to be dead. It's fixed and it's in black and white and it's flat. They're just flat images. And no one has been able to observe sort of any of these particles infecting a cell. They may see what appears to be something, as they say, budding out of a cell, but they never know whether it's actually budding out of a cell or going into a cell, or indeed what it is. And there's other theories about these cellular particles, and some talk about exosomes. But again, when they talk about exosomes, they talk about them as beneficial things. But again, there's no scientific evidence for any of these so-called particles to be active in anything, and certainly not to be infectious agents. So we've often likened it to imagining a small piece of glass that you drop on the floor and it breaks into a dozen pieces or more, which is a cell when it breaks up. And but then you've got virologists come along and they start looking at these broken pieces, which are all different shapes and sizes, and then they start giving names to the individual pieces and attributing causes to each of them. And it's very similar to that, but again, no proof. So they're just assumptions and dogma based on faulty methodology. And as I said earlier, there is nothing that happens in a virology lab in their petri dishes that can be likened exactly to what's happening in the human body. There's no comparison.
So and I also find it fascinating that they look at things with staining methods and under heat, and they tend to alter the particles before they even visualize them. So yes, they make assumptions there as well that how do they know they haven't fundamentally altered those particles into something completely else? They're not visualizing it in the living blood.
Exactly. And they do this all the time. You're quite correct. There's staining and fixing agents. They introduce antibiotics quite often, and sort of other cellular material from bovine cells, monkey cells. They do all sorts of things in their petri dishes. So it ends up a cocktail And like any cocktail, you've got a complete mixture of stuff. And so how anyone can derive anything scientific from that is impossible. I mean, we looked back, because it was actually suggested we did by Dr. Stefan Lanka when we talked to him once. He suggested we looked at the Enders and Peebles paper of 1954, I think it was, when some of the original tests were done in petri dishes, supposedly finding what the measles virus was. And as we know, I think most people know the story that, and Dr. Stefan Lank was able to prove that in a German court, that there is no proof that there is a virus causes measles. But it all stems from those original papers of 1954. And the Enders and Peebles, who were conducting those tests, if you read the papers, they say themselves, and when you see what they were doing in their petri dishes, it was a complete cocktail. And they basically say themselves, this doesn't prove anything and further research is needed. But that basic paper of 1954 is what all modern day virology is based on. So it was based on a shifting, sand, as it were. It was not based on anything sound. And this again was something that Dr. Stefan Lanka pointed out in the German court. So you've got one fallacy based upon another, and this is what modern virology is. And it's a real tragedy that obviously for financial reasons, the pharmaceutical companies have based all of their multi-billion pound industry on this fallacy because it's very profitable for them, of course. Mm-hmm. And, but it's not based on science, and this is what we found time and time again. And to sort of test what we were coming across during our research with human anatomy, if you like, and human disease, we wanted to see whether it was also true then in animals. And so we started to look at animal diseases too, to see whether there was something different. And it wasn't. It was exactly the same. So, which is reassuring, of course, that the same fallacies that were being used about human diseases was true of animal diseases. We always found, in every case, there was a much more plausible reason as to why the animals got sick, and it was invariably something they were poisoned with. And we do cite one case because it was particularly famous in the UK, and I'll mention it now because it's one I quite like. And that was what became called mad cow disease in the UK, and BSE, as it's officially known. And when we looked at that, rather than it being some infection, as we were told, it was purely to do with how the government and the government ministries insisted in the UK of how cattle were washed, dipped, to supposedly protect them from warble fly. But they used a strength of organophosphate, which was 4 times the strength of anywhere else. And organophosphate, as you know, is a neurotoxin, and it was seeping into the spinal columns of the cows were being washed down with it, and gave them the appearance of going mad because they were losing bodily control of their limbs and then were being slaughtered. And thousands of cattle were slaughtered in the UK based on this fallacy. But of course, the governments have never admitted it, but they put a lot of farmers out of business, and a great human and animal tragedy. So again, nothing to do with a germ, purely to do with poisoning. And again, we found it with myxomatosis in rabbits, and
because we decided that we have to try and use the scientific method where possible and keep testing our hypothesis. So we had the idea that, well, if it's not germs, then let's look at other causes. Well, so in this particular example, the BSE, we found there were toxins involved, organophosphates. So again, looking at other diseases, we thought, well, let's put aside the so-called infectious agent idea and see if there's any evidence to show us, or at least give us strong indications that there were other causes. And we found in every single case we looked at. Now, we didn't look at every single infectious disease, or so-called, because there are apparently thousands of them. But we did try to investigate thoroughly the fairly major ones, and they're the ones that we've included in the book. But we always looked at so many other possible or potential causes, and we found evidence that supported what our ideas were, what our hypotheses were. So, you know, we just kept looking for that evidence to support what we thought was or were the causes or are the causes, rather than looking for the, you know, non-existent evidence that it was anything to do with any so-called virus or bacterium. Now, I mean, bacteria are alive. Obviously, that's a completely different organism, and it's a real organism. But there is absolutely no evidence that they are the cause of disease either, which I know everyone's sort of starting to realise the problem with viruses, but the idea that bacteria cause disease is also needs to be understood, because I have seen a number of cases where, or a number of reports, if you like, where people are saying, well, this isn't a viral problem, you know, this COVID thing isn't a viral problem, but it's a bacterial pneumonia. So they're sort of shifting it into a bacterial cause. Mm-hmm. And that would be a mistaken route to go down, because, as we say, you know, there's no evidence that bacteria cause disease. In fact, they are essential. They are essential to all life on the planet, you know, including the human body, not just in the digestive system, where people know, or where they, you know, break down the sort of food into component parts, and but, you know, bacteria also exist in other parts of the body. They are essential. So, you know, they shouldn't be blamed as causes.
I mean, it's another example. We came across this a lot, where the medical establishment fudge the issue. You know, that once they start getting caught out on something, they then try and move the topic in a sideways motion. They're very deceitful.
Yeah, keep moving the goalposts. Absolutely,
yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And, you know, they rename so-called diseases. They, well, like we were talking earlier about a virus being a non-living thing. You know, it's quite clearly not. It has none of the attributes. And then they try to come up with, oh, well, maybe under certain circumstances it is alive. How? Explain to us how something that has none of the attributes of a living thing, i.e. under their own scientific disciplines, I mean, for something to be classed as alive, it has to be able to eat and excrete, has to be able to reproduce, has to have a certain minimum DNA. And these particles don't have any of that, you know, i.e. they're not alive. So, you know, the first question would be, how can they attribute so much to something that's not alive and never has been alive? Mm-hmm. We've even seen them try to fudge it by saying, well, it lies dormant in some way, and it can lie dormant for years and then suddenly come alive in some way and start to cook. I mean, it gets ridiculous. So it does.
It's like a magic show, really. I mean, every time I read it, it's like they just do a little sleight of hand trick to, you know, bridge the gap of the knowledge that isn't there into the next logical fallacy, right? And the problem, of course, being that when your baseline knowledge is in error and you keep building upon that with your science, you will just come back, as Dr. Stefan Lanka says, a circular argument back to just proving your fallacy. So you're not proving science, you're not doing forward science, you're just trying to prove your first fallacy as being true. So it's not pure sciences. It's just, let's just keep this belief system, this scientism going, and hope that nobody notices that we haven't actually done proper science rigorously, and yet say the words over and over, like, well, it's not science what you've said. So then they do what narcissists do, which is gaslight people and say, well, you couldn't possibly know that, or you're mistaken, you don't do science, you don't wear a white coat, whatever they're passing the buck sort of stuff. And they obviously are going to love using the germ as a, you know, Trojan horse for all kinds of other things, right? Like selling their drugs. I mean, that's really one of the reasons why with the Flexner report and the Rockefeller system, when it came in, was like, well, if we scare them to the germ, we can sell them all these drugs. And it comes from petrol, and it's a really very financially viable idea for these people. So it wasn't born of like, let's help humanity, or let's cure the world of all these diseases, or let's cure leprosy or whatever. It was never, ever good intentions that came from that, which is really unfortunate, because I know there are a lot of doctors who get swooped into that, and they probably do have good intentions and they mean well, but they're just so lost in it. Like, one of the things I found fantastic when I read through your book, that the section talking about antibiotics and penicillin, right? And I remember my brother having a violent reaction to penicillin. And as a result, they kept the penicillin away from me too, being, genetically related, because everything's either genetic cause or a germ. That's it. They can't think of toxicology because they don't want to go down that road. They don't want to say, well, we poisoned you with our crap, right? So, but one thing that struck me is and I see this in my practice all the time, is vaccine-caused injuries. So they're poisoned from birth. They go through all kinds of issues. Then they go back to the doctor and they poison them further. And so that, of course, happened to many of us, including me. I had 12 bouts of antibiotics for so-called strep throat, which began from an MMR intoxication from the injection, which I did find a paper that linked the measles wastes from the MMR getting stuck in the tonsil tissue and causing localized inflammation and tissue damage, and therefore secondary bacterial, just breaking down dead tissue were found in the area. But that link to actually causing damage to the adrenal glands, I would love for you to just speak on that briefly, because I found that profound. Not only are you wiping out your milieu that is in every component of your body, not just gut, like you were saying, but also it creates a false sort of high through punching the adrenal glands and creating that. Maybe it might reduce pain. It might make you feel like you're feeling better for a little while, but that's a false sense of security because it's just punching the adrenals. And if you keep repeating the doses, you're going to have some problems. And it explained my situation perfectly, because when I went through medical school, I went through extreme adrenal fatigue and all kinds of problems with my adrenal glands. And I'd had 12 bouts of antibiotics back to back. That's what these people did before they took my tonsils out, and thought that was logical. Thought that, isn't that the definition of insanity, when you keep putting the same thing on the,
Yeah.
it doesn't, right? So, but it clicked for me. I'm like, okay, so it's the adrenals. That's why they got so punched so early in my career, right? And so a lot of people go through this. So what did you find about the toxicity of penicillin, and also some of the information about what it's doing metabolically to the endocrine system? Because I find that absolutely vital information.
Yes, I mean, we found, again, cut a long story short, some of the work of Dr. Beeler, which you may have come across, who was a medical doctor and again practiced all the normal things that he'd been taught as a doctor, not only on his patients but on himself, and realized that over a number of years that didn't actually work. His patients didn't get better, and neither did he. So he realized there was something wrong. So he started to examine the whole medical system himself. We're going back a few years now, and we looked at a lot of his work, and he did some amazing work on exactly what you're talking about. Sort of antibiotics and their effect on the body, in particular the endocrine system. And again, cutting it short, I mean, if you think about the word antibiotic, it means anti-life. So you know that there's a problem to start with. You're taking something that's basically toxic to the body, and that's exactly what it is. The body sees it as toxic, which is what it is, and it wants to get it out of itself as quickly as possible. So, I mean, he sort of referred to it as really firing up the endocrine system in all its facets, including the adrenals, of course, to get rid of this toxin, and along with any other toxin that may have been put into the body, whether it's from vaccinations or anything else, which may have been what was making the person ill in the first place. So along comes the doctor, says, oh yes, we'll give you some antibiotics, which is another load of toxins, fires up the endocrine system, which gets rid of it all, but then they sort of compliment the antibiotics as being the savior, as the thing that's actually made you well, whereas it's the body that's made you well. But of course, the more times you do that, sort of supercharge the endocrine system and the adrenals as part of it with antibiotics, you burn them out, you burn the system out. I often refer to it like over-revving your car engine, having it screaming, and if you run like that all the time, you're going to do serious damage to your engine, so it never works properly. And that's, of course, what happens to your endocrine system. You sort of burn it out, so it doesn't work properly. But then, of course, the medical establishment, rather than admitting what they've done, will say that, well, you're not responding to antibiotics anymore, therefore it must be a superbug that's now come along that's developed a resistance to that antibiotic. So obviously we've got to make another antibiotic and charge you some more money for that, which is great news for the pharmaceutical companies. And they do this all the time. But no, antibiotics are toxic. They're anti-life, they're poisonous, they're meant to be, because they're meant to kill something, but they damage your system. And yes, repeated use of antibiotics seriously damages your system, as you said.
Yeah, it's very sad the way that they hand that out as well, because it's, you know, once that's gone into the system, there's a lot of work that has to be done to rebuild, you know, all of the lineages of the body. And it also starts the thinking of, well, we are full of all of these life forms. We have cells inside of us that are, you know, there's 10 times more bacterial cells than our own. And then what about these, whatever they are calling these other particles, whether it's a exosome, whether it's a breakdown particle, whether it's a somatid or a microzyma or any of these other lineages that they also totally ignore. What does that mean about our environment? What does that mean about us? What does that mean about our soil microbes and what is around us, and that we are one with our environment? And if you do this segregation where you sterilize yourself and try to sterilize the world, that can only cause all kinds of other disease processes in the body when you do that. Because if we are life and life is around us, then why would we kill the life with the antibiotic? And if we are trying to heal ourselves and those microbes and so forth are coming only in when we are toxic and they're trying to clean up the terrain, and then we get rid of that, what is that going to lead to? Well, I mean, cancers and long-term diseases. So the intervention is what creates the long-standing chronic illness, right?
Yeah.
And sorry, go ahead. And then I wanted to ask you a question about all the viruses and, you know, all the viruses in the body.
Yes, I was just going to say that the idea of, you know, these that you were talking about really stems from a mistaken assumption, if you like, that the body's, you know, like a machine of different parts. And another assumption is that, you know, the blood is a sterile environment, or even that the human body is a sterile environment. So finding all these other living somethings in the body was kind of, well, they shouldn't be there, you know, because the body is sterile, if you like. And so they shouldn't be there. That's not part of the human body, you know, so they must have come in and caused damage, rather than realizing or even investigating the true nature of the human organism and human biology, and realizing that it's a self-healing, self-organizing system, rather than just, you know, a machine of different parts made of these sort of, you know, different atoms. It very much comes out of the shall we say, sort of materialistic kind of ideas of I think whether Descartes started it, I don't know, but you know, the mechanistic view of life and living things. So any of these minute creatures, shall we say, are not seen as being part of the environment, you know, essential for the environment. They're just, you know, if you like, pests, you know, like all these other insects or whatever. They're, you know, if they're not in the right place, then they're a pest, and so they have to be got rid of.
But I think it, as you said earlier, Amanda, I think from the early days it may have started out of just misconceptions, and they were making the wrong assumptions about bacteria and viruses, but then it developed into a very successful business model.
Absolutely.
And as you're quite right, the pharmaceutical company, I mean, all pharmaceutical products are based on petrochemical products. So there was an unholy alliance between the petrochemical companies and the pharmaceutical companies as they've grown up. So they have a brilliant business model. It's tragic for human beings, of course, and life on Earth, but these people don't care about that, as we know. So that's why we are where we are with the world today, because of these this unholy alliance, which is supporting one another on a complete fiction, and why we're in the situation we are today with this fiction of the coronavirus, based on no science, and it's easily provable to be not based on any science. So you immediately have to say, so why are they doing it? And of course, then that opens up the agenda that's behind it, which we're well aware of. I'm sure you're well aware of it as to what it is, and it's quite a deep and dark.
Yes, it is deep and dark, and a lot of people, I think, don't want to know, and I think they purposefully cut off their knowledge on these topics because first of all, it's really hard to be wrong if you're in your ego states, right? You don't want to be wrong. And you'd also, if you built a whole career on that lie, that's a pretty tough pill to swallow for a lot of people. Like, imagine all these virologists, their whole careers have been an absolute lie. And not only that, they've pushed ideas that hurt people. So they have blood on their hands. And that is really tough for so many people to just go through that process. And so they'd rather just keep lying. They'd rather ignore that and just keep going.
Make up stories to support their fallacies. And we've seen this recently. I won't go into.
I know who you're talking about.
And anyone who's watched that, that's a disgrace, complete disgrace. But this is what you get. It's
not helpful to humanity, and it would be way better for those people to just say, I'm sorry. Just say, I was wrong and I'm sorry. And I want to make it right before I die. I want to correct it beforehand, and I will work my tail off until my last breath to correct my error. And that would be the most noble thing they could ever do for humanity, would be to do that, because then it would open it up for other virologists and doctors who are stuck in the germ theory to open up and to do it. But you got to have a backbone. You have to be brave, and you have to be okay with your mistakes. And so that means you have to be an adult and not an internal.
You have to realize that science is a process. It's always evolving. It's moving forward, and everything's just absolutely stuck in germ theory, if you like, and nobody's prepared to. Very few are prepared to even contemplate the idea that maybe it's defunct, maybe it's not quite right, at least to even look into other avenues, and they just won't do it.
It is largely vested interest, as you say. That all of virologists' careers depend on it. The pharmaceutical companies depend on it. Doctors depend on it. If you take away the germ theory and remind everyone it is a theory still, which means it's unproven, and it certainly is unproven, but there's so much vested interest based on it. Once you pull that rug from under it, the whole house of cards comes down. All of modern Western medicine collapses, virology collapses, the pharmaceutical companies collapse. Huge. So you can see the reluctance for anyone to start to rethink it, officially, that is. And of course, these same people that own the pharmaceutical companies and the petrochemical companies and the banks also own the media. And we've seen the effects that the media are pumping out this propaganda, I'll call it that. It's certainly not news and it's certainly not truth, but pumping out this propaganda 7 days a week, certainly in the UK. I'm sure you get it in the States too. But it's every time you put on the the so-called news, that's all they talk about. Scaremongering, talk about deaths, which is fictions. I challenge anyone to prove anyone's died of COVID-19 because they can't. You can't die from something that doesn't exist, it's crazy.
And the isolation, when they say isolation, it's important to make clear that they're using a term they've defined. It's like the UN defining peace. It's not what you think it means, okay? It's isolation means that they actually take a cell out. It's with the all the cell structure. They don't, that's their isolation. That's what they're saying isolation is. It's not they've taken out the actual little virus and they're like, hey, little guy, and like, let's talk to it and see what it does and separate out from other stuff. That they have never done that, and they can't do that because there's nothing to it. If they even were successful in somehow doing such a thing with a cell fragment, it would denature immediately as soon as it hits the air. I mean, or any type of heat change or outside the body. And I always found it fascinating that with all the so-called modern tech that we have, why are they still not looking at living blood? You know, why are we have the somatoscope that Gaston Naessens created. There's all this Rife technology, which is, again, a whole living situation, right, of looking at the blood and what's actually happening. They do that on purpose. They don't want you to see what's actually going on down in the bowels of the real of life, of actual life, because that was one of my wake-up calls when I first saw living blood moving. I was like, whoa, this is life. This is just like I'm looking in an ocean, you know, and everything's moving. The white blood cells look alive. Everything looks like it has feet and it moves. Like that's what we are, right? And when you get that in your head, this whole theory starts to smell fishy, right? You're like, no, we're living. So that's okay. I think that's part of what we are. I think that's part of our existence, right?
Yeah. But you're right. I mean, it's not that they couldn't do these tests, you know, of proper isolation as a dictionary definition. You know, to isolate something is to just isolate the thing from every other thing.
Because that's what they're doing to humans at the moment. They're definitely isolating people.
But to isolate, but to isolate a particle, you know, they could do it, but they don't do it because there is nothing for them to isolate. But people often forget that's only part of what Koch's postulates ask them to do. You know, if they ever went to the stage of isolating this particle that they say causes the disease, they should then be able to introduce it into a living creature, preferably a human, and then that person is supposed to develop the disease. And you're then supposed to be able to take a sample of blood from that person with the disease and find the viruses in it. So it's not just a case of isolating it, which they've never done, but they've never done the rest of Koch's postulates, which are, you know, which is what they're supposed to live by, but ignore all the time when it suits them. So they've never done any of the things scientifically that they should do for every virus and for every causal agent for a disease. They've never done any. So they don't practice science at all. And for them, that's for the reason of they need to support their fallacy. Because if they did proper science, their fallacy would be exposed. And as I've said, the whole house of cards would fall down.
And there are papers showing that these are pleomorphic type of bacteria. Like when we go down the bacterial route, right, they change shape. And we do have studies showing their pleomorphic nature, as you have brought up in your book. And that when you give a pleomorphic bacteria, which means that it will change based on the environment in which it is placed. Yeah. If you now take that and put it in, say, agar, you're going to change what it becomes because it's going to adapt to what it's been placed into. So that's going to be a different presentation in your blood and in each individual's blood and pH and all of their intricacies to a standardized agar plate, which is trying to grow up something and show you that, yes, see what came out of your body. So right there, they've made a critical error of just removing it from one medium and placing it on another and assuming that it will be the same exact bacteria at that point when they grow it. That's a huge misunderstanding that a lot of people, I don't think they have ever thought about, which is valuable.
You're quite correct. But also I mean, this is why I said earlier that the stuff that goes off in the laboratory and in the petri dishes, which is all they're doing, bears no resemblance to what happens in the human body. And so there's no correlation between the two, but they make all their assumptions based on what happens in a petri dish. And it's hardly surprising that it's comes out as a complete fallacy. But unfortunately, the fallacies that they produce have dire consequences for humanity, as we're experiencing today.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry,
were you going to
Dawn.
say something, Dawn?
Yeah.
Pretty much what David was saying, that they're completely ignoring the environment within the human body, which is completely different. But not just the environment, but the fact that it's an interconnected system. So that, you know, each bacterium doesn't exist kind of in a vacuum within the body. It's interconnected with everything else, and so there are processes within the body that are completely ignored. Well, they just don't happen. Immediately you take something out of the body, it's very different. And so any processes that happen normally within the body just won't happen, because there aren't all the connections and the communications and anything else that's going on within the body that will affect the behavior, the actions, the functions of that bacterium. And so once you've taken it out.
I mean, for instance, the pharmaceutical companies only seem to think of the body as a chemical system. I mean, everything they do is to do with chemicals, really. Mm-hmm. That's the other big industry that's supported by it, of course. But they completely ignore the fact that the human body is an electrical system as well. And it has a very subtle electrical system, which is very important. And yes, there are chemical reactions that happen in the body, but they interact with the electrical system in the body. So again, as Dawn has said, once you take some cellular particles out of the body and put them in a petri dish, you've again completely isolated it from the environment of the body and the body's electrical system. So it's not going to be the same, and you're not going to be able to draw any sensible scientific conclusions from it. But unfortunately, that's exactly what they do.
Well, at least there's more and more people looking at the living blood, the holographic nature of the blood, and what's really going on. And I think as we continue to do research and we continue to speak and build up the new paradigm, because really it's a scientific revolution and that takes time. And we have to, build the evidence before it topples over the lies. And that's a process. And you've done a great job in really touching on so many different topics in your book. I mean, you go through syphilis and leprosy and cervical cancer and, all of these different so-called diseases that are supposed to be linked to either a bacterium or a virus, and dismantled them. And so it's, and helped the mind get through it, which I think one of the biggest values that I found through this book is just that my mind feels clearer about that topic now. And every time you go into it and really think it through, you get that foundation stronger. And then your confidence comes up as well, because then you know that if you're around someone who's expressing some sort of sickness, that you're fine, you're not going to catch it. And 9 times out of 10, if people think they do catch it, it's really the power of belief that is projecting, and they're going through a detox because they believe it. And that's another thing that people just have ignored in this entire discussion. Like the electricity part is huge, and also the beliefs, the way that our mind works to create actual biochemistry in cascade, like Candace Pert has shown, and how epigenetics works. I mean, they ignore complete topics of science and knowledge to continue to push their agendas and their false ideas. And it's just becoming archaic. That excites me, because I feel like we're going to get somewhere if we continue to traverse these topics and build the library of knowledge for others to just get out of the false groupthink. And really, it's just a religious belief. It's not actual science. And let's get to real science now, which is repeating an observation. And I can tell you, clinical science is also very devalued, because when we're talking about this stuff, it's very individual. So your milieu of your body is going to be different than somebody else as well, which they're also not going to consider when you try to isolate it and put it in a petri dish and all that sort of stuff, right? And so when you're working from a holistic concept, you're really listening to the individual, and because it's the individual with the disease or the illness that matters, not the characterization of the disease and what it's supposed to look like and all of these things. And people get stuck in that, like, oh, leprosy is this and this is what happens in the body, right? But then in your book you say, well, they've used the BCG vaccine equally for leprosy, and like they don't they say it works for that, but they don't qualify it. Like, why would that work when it's supposed to be not the agent for so-called, leprosy, right? Like, you have skin eruptions and you have people who are poor and sitting in wastes and this sort of thing. So why is that so-called connected, in their minds? Not that nothing of that makes sense. And then you take the individual and you look at their circumstances and you take their story and you realize, well, they're poor, they're nutritionally deficient, they've been poisoned by vaccines, they've been poisoned by drugs, they're depressed, they have no clothing, they're exposed. I mean, why wouldn't you get skin eruptions from that, from just dirt on your skin? And then those can become festering and problematic. And eventually your limbs will fall off, don't you think? I mean, that's just, to me, that's complete logic. But no, they need to somehow find a causative agent by pulling out the tissue and saying, oh, there it is, right? I mean, it's just, to me, it's so absurd. But I found that fascinating in your book about, then you can have a vaccine and it somehow also causes polio, which is paralysis, syphilis, leprosy, cancer. So this is what smallpox vaccines are doing, for example, right? Do you want to just touch on some a little bit of that? And because I find that very fascinating.
You're quite right with what you say. I mean, when we looked, and we did look at those diseases, smallpox and syphilis and STDs in general, really. And certainly the old diseases, so-called, like leprosy and smallpox, really, their causes are exactly what you said. They're poor nutrition and toxification. So wherever you get poor nutrition, and that's the right supply of vitamins and minerals to the body will start to fall apart, literally. I mean, a prime example of that was what used to be called scurvy, which was, the sailors, sailing in sailing ships, long journeys across the Atlantic and the Pacific, with their sort of meager rations, which was sort of not nice dishes of fruit and vegetables, and they used to come down with this scurvy and very similar symptoms in its advanced stages to leprosy, where the lack of, as they found eventually, it was with scurvy, it was lack of vitamin C, and it took them a long time before they actually started putting fruit on the boats, which happened to be barrels of limes. And actually why the Americans at the time call the British limeys. Mm-hmm. It's an old name because of the tubs of limes that used to be on the sailing ships, so that the sailors didn't go down with scurvy. But that was a pure and simple lack of vitamin C. But it literally could kill people. They started to fall apart both inside and out, mm-hmm. with the skin coming off. Mm-hmm. The disease in South America called pellagra, which had similar effects. And when it was examined and eventually found out what it was a lack of a B vitamin, B3, which niacin. So once that was corrected, that disease went away. So there's all sorts of examples like that. And leprosy is another one where people are not getting the right nutritious food, come up with these terrible ailments, literally with skin falling off their body. Now, originally, leprosy was thought to be contagious, and hence lepers were put into colonies and isolated from people. But in later years, of course, they realized it wasn't a contagious anything at all, because there was no, despite what the medical establishment said, there was no infectious agent. It was literally the body being deprived of what it needs, living in insanitary conditions, and not having the correct levels of nutrition. And that's really what that disease was all about. And that's why in modern times, where those things have been corrected, where people have a better diet in most places and have more sanitary conditions, the disease has sort of fallen away. And the only cases when you come across it is in so-called developing countries, where the people are very poor, living in very poor conditions with not the right levels of nutrition. So again, it proves itself that those are the causes. It's nothing to do with a germ at all.
But no, what I was going to say was that the sort of skin eruptions on diseases like leprosy or smallpox or those kinds of things, the origin of the word virus was that the substance within the kind of pustules, if you like, the pus, was called virus because it was a noxious substance. It was a poison. That was the virus. Not that there was a virus, a living thing in it, but it was, if you like, the sort of the toxid of disease, the virus of disease. And that's where the word came from. That's the context it was used in, for centuries, and it was only convenient to make it into some kind of particle. But that's where the origin of the use of this word virus for something that is to do with skin eruptions and these kind of skin diseases, or so-called infectious diseases, which of course they're not. But as I say, it was just that origin, that pus from the pustules. That's where, that's where
a poison or noxious substance. That was its original
That's
meaning.
What was called virus. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And also that, you've got all these multiple, like they say, okay, AIDS is a constellation of different diseases, or, you've got TB, and then TB supposedly given silently by somebody else who's carrying it, but the person who's getting it in early TB has no actual TB cells or bacilli found inside their lungs whatsoever. So there's all of these big mistakes that I find quite glaring and really alarming. I mean, if you just look into that, that's like that whole theory is gone when you realize that what a lie, because you either have the bacterium that's causing the disease or you don't. You can't have, it's not there at the beginning and it was given by someone who was never sick to you. And that just sounds to me absolutely insane. That is not science, right?
It is,
and it's like a made up thing. Okay, now you have this presentation, which we're going to call this disease, but it's still caused by the same virus. Like nothing makes any sense. And then they give you an injection and you present with a whole other constellation of illnesses, and they think you have all these other new illnesses. They're so psychopathic that they can't even make correlations between immediate injection and a disease process happening in the body, which to me just shows you how indoctrinated the mind is, that it can't even see what's right before it, right?
I mean, you're quite right with what you say about TB. I mean, it again flies in the face of Koch's postulates, which says that someone with the said disease, the germ should always be found in that person. And someone who is healthy, the germ should never be found in that person. And yet it gets complete contradiction, because you find the opposite in both cases. So even their own Koch's postulates, they totally ignore because it doesn't work.
But that's what they call asymptomatic. If you've got an apparent infection, but no actual disease. But that's of course a complete fallacy, because each disease is defined by reference to the symptoms. So if you haven't got a symptom, you can't have a disease. And if as you say, if the bacterium's found, then it can't be the causal agent. It's absolutely ludicrous. And that's, obviously for us, we didn't have to kind of come out of the conditioning, as you say, we have to just believe that and trust that. We did apply logic, but sometimes it stretched our belief, thinking, how could people have believed this when there's a disease is defined by its symptoms, and if you've got no symptoms, you can't have a disease. But the interesting thing with TB is, of course, that's the disease that Robert Koch is credited with finding the bacterium, and so it's quite fundamental, because that's the start of his Koch's postulates and the whole bacteriology. He's the father of bacteriology, in the same way that Pasteur is the father of the germ theory. And so it was quite fundamental for us to really dive into TB, but not just, if you like, in the Western world, but also in so-called developing countries, which is why we had to look to see if what we were finding about the causes of TB, whether that applied elsewhere. And the interesting thing is that it's believed to be it's believed to have been declining in the West, but more recently it started to resurgence, and interestingly in inner city slums. So that just goes to show that there is a correlation between the way people live and a disease that's called tuberculosis. I mean, it isn't, but it's obviously the particular type of condition, a particular type of set of symptoms that people have when they live in these poor conditions. And as I say, the fact that it's within inner city slums just is so revealing. Absolutely.
Yeah. Same with the Black Death too.
Yeah. I mean, we did investigate that, of course, in the book, because as Dawn said earlier, we did our own what ifs. Well, how did that work? And so we thought we'd, go back as far as we could in history. And we did look at the Black Death, and some very interesting things came out about that, because we both remember when we were at school, we were told the Black Death was all caused by infected rat fleas. And it may be still taught today, I don't know. But
oh, yeah.
A lot of people still believe that. But when you look at it from a scientific point of view, you realize that that's a load of nonsense again. And we came across, which we do talk about in the book, we came across some very interesting work by a professor in an Irish university, Professor Mike Bailey. I'll just mention it briefly for those who have not heard about it. And he was still is, as far as I know, a dendrochronologist, which is somebody who studies tree rings, which you may think is a strange thing. But trees are very ancient things, and there are some trees, I think the oldest ones are 5,000 years old, which is incredible for the oldest living thing, really. But with a tree ring, you can go back in history and you can look at what the Earth's atmosphere was like in a particular year. And as a dendrochronologist, that's what he did. And he thought he'd examine what was going off around the time of the Black Death over Europe and that. And again, kind of long story short, he realized that something very strange had happened to the Earth's atmosphere. It had become very toxic, very poisonous. There was high levels of all sorts of toxic gases, including ammonia. And so he thought, well, this is very strange. So he then correlated the tree rings with ice core samples, which again, you can go back into early Earth's history. And from the ice cores, you can check what was happening in the Earth's atmosphere. And he found the tree rings and the ice cores, correlated with this toxic atmosphere. So he looked further into it to see what could have caused that. And there was tales of a lot of more volcanic activity around the world and earthquakes. And obviously people know whenever the Earth opens up, for whatever reason, all sorts of gases and toxic material is released into the atmosphere. And he then also correlated all of that with actual eyewitness accounts. And people of the time were talking about very toxic atmosphere. Well, they didn't use the word toxic, a very poisonous atmosphere, that it was thick and stinking and choking, and people were just dropping down dead in the street. There was no sort of incubation period over a few weeks and people getting ill. They just dropped down dead in the street. So, and they also, which I found particularly interesting, they talked about the rivers and lakes becoming toxic and the fish floating to the surface dead. Well, that was patently nothing to do with rat fleas. So he was obviously onto something there. And it may be a side issue, but he also mentioned eyewitness accounts where they talked about a comet coming in close into the Earth's atmosphere, which again may have contributed to toxic phenomena in the Earth's atmosphere. So the Earth's atmosphere basically became very toxic and was not only killing people, it was killing animals, and it was poisoning the water. So people could also have been dying of poisoned water. They drink the water. They didn't have the sort of filtration plants that we have today, not that they're all that good. So they could have been drinking poisonous water. And in more later times, particularly in London, recent archaeological digs were looking for die-offs of rats, because the rats were also supposed to die from these infected fleas. And so there should have been large die-offs of rats, none of which were reported from eyewitnesses of the time. And when they did the archaeological digs in London, none were to be found there either. So again, these rat die-offs were another myth. So again, all of this together, we do talk about it a bit more in the book, shows that the Black Death was, again, nothing to do with a germ of some sort. It was to do with toxicity in the atmosphere and getting into the water, and both of them were poisoning people. Someone also statistically looked at how quickly diseases can spread between one person or one animal and another. And they were able to calculate that for a disease to have spread as quickly as it did across Europe, let's say, it would have been impossible for it to be an infection. It traveled so quickly, it couldn't have been being passed from one person or an animal to another. But of course, if it was the whole atmosphere became toxic, then that would explain why it covered such a large area in such a short space of time. So again, when it's looked at scientifically, you realize that it's nothing to do with infected rat fleas, and that there are other much more probable causes for such a phenomenon as the Black Death.
And it doesn't seem that difficult. When you do the research, you will find the evidence. It's not like, oh, well, I couldn't find anything. I don't know. No, it's there. It's readily there. Like, oh, look at that. Isn't that interesting? We have an environmental causation. Oh, poison in the water, which they're still doing to this day. They're poisoning people through the water source with fluoride and chlorine and other, materials that get in there. And of course, these things are going to make you sick. What I find fascinating is I don't find that a hard leap in the mind. I don't see that as a difficult place to go in your thinking, right? Like if you eat something poisonous, your body becomes like, if you eat rotted food, right? We can't eat food that's rotting back into the ground because it's full of all the waste and the toxins of the breakdown products that the bacteria and fungus and all this stuff are actually putting off, right? And they have their own protection mechanisms. Like that's where the penicillin came from, right? Like you have like funguses and things make their own, get away from me. Other creatures don't eat me. That's their own defense mechanisms. And they just want to eat as well, right? But if we eat the waste, then the body says, no, you can't have those breakdown products and you'll become violently ill, you'll throw up and that sort of thing. That's food poisoning. And even like I make all these handmade creams and salves and stuff, and I have to be very clean when I make that, because as soon as you have a food or a lotion or anything, the earth wants to take it back home into the soil. So, and that's through bacteria and fungus and so forth. And so of course that you want to protect your thing that's dead, effectively dead, from breaking down, right? But what I find also fascinating is people are not talking about the things that are making more and more people ill, is all the toxic load coming up, like metals and all sorts of exposures in the house, like, toluenes and all of these, diseases in the house from like just off-gassing of all these plastics and things and EMFs. And like, there's so many other toxins coming in that can degrade the body. And what I'm seeing personally is a lot of parasite problems. Like people are just full of worms and full of flukes. I mean, that's a real epidemic as far as I'm concerned. I'm detoxing people from parasites all the time. And again, it's not a problem in and of itself. It's that they're coming in because you're giving them food. They're just coming in because you've created the buffet for them to eat those materials, right? And if you're living in a moldy house, you're going to get sick because, again, all of those off-gassing products eventually are going to come into your body, and your body cannot handle so much waste, any type of toxic waste. And so I find everyone's like so focused on this mythological viral thing, and they're missing glaring problems in our health right now. I mean, doctors will say there's no parasites, you're a loon, you're something wrong with your head. Meanwhile, I have cases of parasites coming out of people's eyes, where they do a coffee enema and the whole toilet's full of flukes. I mean, these are people that don't even have severe symptoms, just malaise, right? So then they're ignoring all of those other problems by, again, the smokescreen of this scary virus. So did you, in your research, find anything else about, other types of microorganisms that, worms and stuff, or any evidence of like bed sores turning into maggots? Because I had someone tell me that their bed sore became maggoty with no outside source coming in and actually like no flies laying eggs or anything like that. And that was very curious to me. And I wanted to go down that route of study, but I was wondering when you were researching what you found out about those types of organisms.
Well, I've not come across the bed sores with maggots before. I mean, but certainly parasites. The body has a mechanism for dealing with parasites. A normal healthy body deals with parasites by releasing nitric oxide, if I remember correctly, to kill off the parasites. But of course, you're quite correct. If you've got an unclean terrain, which provides food for parasites, funguses, is another one, but they're doing a job. The funguses, for instance, they're trying to, in the same way that bacteria do, if the body is not in a has homeostasis, so it's in an unclean state, these are trying to clean it up. But of course, the medical establishment sees them as an enemy and just wants to kill them off, which then, of course, makes the whole situation worse. So if people have a healthy body, they wouldn't be suffering from parasites. And if they did somehow get a parasitic infection, the body does have a first line of defense, as I say, with nitric oxide. But I guess there's going to be stages where some people get so deep into toxification that they need some help to get them back into a place where they can reach homeostasis. And it's interesting to hear you say that you're coming across more and more cases of people having these parasitic infections, which is not something you would expect in a so-called advanced country like America, but
Canada.
Canada, or America for that matter, or the UK for that matter. But of course, you do come across it more, rather than with all the money that's spent on the health systems in all three of those countries, huge amounts of money. You would expect that we'd have the best health in the world, but we don't. For the majority of people, their health is getting worse and worse. And so people really ought to be asking why that is. And that surely, you would think, would wake them up to realize that the mainstream medical system is failing them, that it doesn't understand them or their supposed illness. And that's why the Voltaire quote is on the back of our book, which people like. I don't know whether I can remember it, but it's basically along the lines of doctors are men who prescribe medicines of which they know little to cure diseases of which they know less in human beings of whom they know nothing.
Absolutely.
And that was true in the 1700s, and it's still just as true today. Very wise man was Voltaire.
Yes, there are a number of doctors, obviously, that doesn't apply to, in increasing numbers, those who are kind of, looking at waking up, looking at the human body, looking at human biology in a somewhat different way, and stop thinking about these so-called germs, and really have to completely change the way people look, and that's why the subtitle is Why Everything You Thought You Knew About Disease Is Wrong, because disease isn't an entity that attacks the body. There's nothing out there that's trying to harm us, but it does require people to know what they're exposing themselves to, what they're putting in and on their bodies, what they're, everything they're eating, and certainly that's with the increasing kind of toxins in food production, whether it's agriculture or even manufactured food products, it's not surprising that people are getting these parasites mainly in the digestive system, which again is disrupted. It's not functioning properly, and so people are not getting the nutrients they require. So it's a vicious circle, really. It's not to scare people that, you're surrounded by toxins and everything's dire. It's just to know, and that's really the point of the book, is to provide people with the information so that they know what are the toxins and where they are, so they can avoid them, and also what they can do to change what their lifestyle, the products they use, and everything that they eat. It's designed not to scare people, but it's to give them the information, as we say, to make informed decisions. It's not telling people what to do, but there's the information, and now you can do something about it, and take control of your own health. And that's the thing, again, it's not the have to believe in the authority of the white coat, and this is not being disparaging to doctors. We know a lot of them are trying to do the right thing. They went into that career for the right reason and with the right intent, but they've got the wrong information and they're starting from the wrong place. So it's to say, look, we can take certainly a lot of responsibility. Certain exposures you can't, like you say, EMFs. There are certain exposures that's out there in the environment that you can't necessarily affect. but the body is amazing, and it can actually do a lot of its own detoxification, as David was saying. Sort of it's a normal part of the process to detoxify. So it's not to be scared of all these toxins, but you can't overload the system, otherwise it does struggle to be healthy, because the body's not kind of an inert thing. It's trying to restore health. It's trying to get itself, it is an active system, and it will continue to try and get back to being healthy as long as you're alive. Your body's trying to help you be healthy.
That's very important what you just said, and I teach that all the time. Your body is innately intelligent. It knows what it's doing. The symptoms are not a problem. The symptoms are showing you information, and it's the body's intelligence trying to make a correction. And so you don't want to suppress the symptom. You want to listen to what the symptom is showing you about the process of the body in its correction, in trying to get into homeostasis. And then you're going to apply it in the direction it's going. So you're going to help it do that rather than go in the opposite direction, because the more you suppress it with the opposite, like, putting a drug and just making the symptoms disappear, then the body cannot correct properly. And so you will actually fester that issue, and it will prolong it. And if you're lucky, once the drug residue has dispersed, it will try that again in the same way in which it was already doing it. And we see that with things like eczema, for example, right? And like they use cortisone, it comes back, cortisone comes back, cortisone, but then eventually it'll go into the lung tissue, and you'll get asthma, or you'll get other problems like a psoriasis of the liver and these sorts of things, because the mechanism becomes broken after a while. It's like, well, that's not working. Every time we do it, we can't get around it. So I guess we'll go through another organ of elimination. We'll try the lungs, or we'll try see if the liver will take this again, or whatnot, right? And so you'll get deposits, you get arthritis, and all of these other things that happen in the body. But if you listen and you help it express with the proper nutrition and lifestyle factors. And I like that in your book, you go through a lot of the poisons in our environment and things that are, affecting us negatively, so people can become more aware of what they're putting on their body, which is a two-way street. The organ breathes, in two directions. So you don't want to put, all these petrochemicals all over your skin as well as inside your body. And that's one of the things that why I started my own business, and why I started making really clean products, because I literally couldn't find anything clean for my own daughter. I wanted a diaper cream for my daughter, and it was all full of petrochemicals, and they would call it green. So be careful of greenwashing and all of this industry nonsense. It's all marketing. The whole thing really is all marketing. It's selling us an idea, right? Yeah. And so I really like in the back of your book, you go through a lot of those different chemicals and ideas about how to avoid them, and the problems associated with them, and the research there. And I find that amazing. I know we went over quite longer than we had intended, but it's just so fascinating, because this is so important. This is vital information. This is revolutionary information, and it's empowering. And that's where we need to be right now. We need to be empowered to take the muzzle off and to stand up to these jailers of ours and say, enough, no more. You're lying to us. You've been lying to us for hundreds of years, and we're tired of it. And we have the evidence. We have the truth there, and we're going to just keep sharing it. So I encourage, everyone to please share this video far and wide, and please, you're welcome to take out snippets and reformat it. I totally give license to that, because we're all so heavily censored. They don't want this information out. So we really want to try to educate people and take the fear factor out, so they can think again, right? And get their adrenals, calm down. But any last words about what we've been talking about, or anything that you feel, you want to leave the audience with, that you think is very important in this time?
Yes, I think, and thank you for what you've just said. Yes, I think the biggest thing that we would hope that the information we give out on our website and in our book is to take fear away from people, because that's a very big thing at the moment, and it's been driven by the mainstream media in particular, and the governments, to keep people afraid and away from one another, not talking to one another, muzzling people, as you say, with these damn masks, all of which doesn't take much research to show that they would be completely useless, even if there was a virus a pathogenic agent floating about, which of course there isn't. But this is what people buy into. So we're hoping that the information we put out will take away that fear from people, so they can, because that's a very debilitating thing and can make people ill. We've seen suicide rates go up in both the UK and the States. So that's one thing. Let's take away the fear. Let's show people that they can take charge of their own health. They don't need to, immerse themselves in all sorts of drugs. That's the worst thing they can do. Take back control. And we're hoping as well, the sort of side, well, probably one of the main issues really, that if people can see through this gigantic lie that's been perpetrated about health through this non-existent virus, if they can see the type of lie and the size of the lie that's been perpetrated on them by all of the world governments and all of the world medical establishments and all of the world media, then they will never believe them again. And therefore that will stop them from ever perpetrating such a lie on the people again, and will encourage the people to push back and to take back control of their lives as well as their health. Because if they don't, there's no one else going to do it. If people don't get together themselves and do it, no one else is going to. And as I alluded to earlier, if we don't, then the future for humanity as a whole is very dark indeed. So I do encourage everyone to show some courage and to learn the truth about what's happening and to make those changes. The people have got to do it. No one else will.
Well said. And this is the book we've been talking about. You can see all my little notes in there. What really makes you ill, why everything you thought you knew about disease is wrong. And this is David Parker and Don Lester. And it's an incredible, look at that. I mean, that's a monster. It's a beautiful book. You got to digest it piece by piece. I'm starting to mark mine up more and more. And where can people purchase the book, or where's the best place for them to purchase the book?
Well, of course, like all books, they end up on Amazon. No matter what you do, they're on Amazon. Now, we know that people don't always like to buy from Amazon, so we're happy to say there's quite a lot of online bookstores that you can get it through. There's quite a few of them, surprised me. So if people just have a bit of a look for online bookstores where they can buy it from, you can we do an ebook version of it.
But that's only available through Kindle, I'm afraid.
Yeah,
so that's the way things are at the moment. It's just really...
But, for those who are wanting something a little less expensive, shall we say, the Kindle version is only about $10, something like that. And, of course, the advantage of the Kindle version is it's very easy to search because it has a search facility. So you can search by keywords, which is some people find very useful. But
there is quite an extensive table of contents. It's not an index, I know people say, but the table of contents is quite extensive. I think it's about 4 or 5 pages or something. So lots of information in that. And
people can go to our website at whatreallymakesyouill.com. As well as there being articles that we put up from time to time. There's videos like this one will be referenced on there. But the book, you can also do a look inside on our book. So you can have a look at the table of contents and you can read some of it actually online on our site, which people might find helpful as well. So, yeah, I hope people will have a look, but I hope people will take notice and take back their power. That's the important thing. They must take back their power and do something positive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well said. I appreciate both of you so much for all the work you've done and for, all the, and doing all the interviews and everything as well, because it can be quite tiring, as I know personally. And, but this is the time to really be brave and work hard and just get up every day with determination. And, if you have your days where it's getting you down, just, go for a walk and drink some water and, take a bath and do some self-care, but just get up. And we are warriors in this now. And we have to continue to stay strong and believe that there's going to be good that comes out of all of this mess. Because look at the conversations we're having. I mean, we weren't having these conversations previously. And even when your book came out, it wouldn't have been the same kind of level of conversation and poignancy as it is now. So I think the timing was definitely very divine. And I promote your book all the time. I'm going to do actually an article about your book on my blog. And I will also post this video on my own video server because I had to create one due to all the censorship. So that's at my website, yummy.doctor. You don't put .com or anything like that. The doctor is the domain name. And so it'll be under the videos section. As well, if you hit on blog, you can see all the information. I have a lot of Stefan Lanka's information there as well. I actually dictated orally one of his important articles about the falsity of the corona hoax and why we know it wasn't isolated and who the players were in perpetuating this farce. And it's very well done. And Lanka has been on our side as well. And people can look at his work and others who, understand that the body is innately intelligent and we have to apply the correct methodologies for optimal health and clear cognition, because that seems to be a lot of the problem now as well, as people can't seem to think their way out of this mess. So I thank you both again so much. I would love to interview you again some other time. And I had this idea, I had this vision in my meditation where you were teaching little modules of your book. So you would take like one of the topics and then just break it down into like a small little video series for people to digest. And that might be something to consider. I just sort of saw it in my mind's eye because I was thinking, what would help people digest the material, right? Because a lot of people will not read it because they're too busy or they'll make excuses or whatever. And I know because we've been taken away from books. We've been taken into, right, like reading things on computers and all those sorts of things. So, but a book in the hand is to me the best. But for those who can't go there or don't have time or stressed or whatnot, little tiny modules of bits of your chapters, I think would be very marvelous for people to get a hold of. So anyway, it was an idea. I thought I'd present it.
Yeah,
that's a good idea.
Yeah, we'll certainly consider it. Yeah,
and of course, we'd be more than happy to talk to you again, Amanda. And thank you very much for all the kind things you've said, and thank you very much for your time too. As like you, we're all working hard to get this information out because we know it's quite a pivotal point in human history at the moment, and I can't stress that too strongly. It's a very pivotal point, and we have to do what we're doing, and people have to wake up while they still can. That's
right. Exactly. So thank you again. If you are interested in any of my holistic products, you can go to yumnaturals.store. And if you are interested in my book, Healing with DMSO, you can get that at healingwithdmso.com. And I, again, thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful rest of your evening, I guess, over there. Is it in the evening now in the UK?
Yes.
Yeah. We have a full day ahead here. So God bless and all the best. And thank you again for your time. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye for now.